to that old Jordan stream, you know.
The angels in heaven done sign my name.
I stepped in the water, and the water was cold.
The angels in heaven done sign my name.
Well, it chilled my body, but not my soul. You know,
The angels in heaven done sign my name. I know I've been changed.
you see that
I know I've been changed.
good Lord,
I know I've been changed.
you know,
The angels in heaven done sign my name.
I've got a robe, and you've got a robe, and well,
All of God's children got a robe.
oh, and
When I get to heaven, gonna put on my robe. Gonna walk all over God's heaven.
and I've got a crown, you've got a crown, and well,
All of God's children got a crown.
oh, and
When I get to heaven, gonna put on my crown. Gonna walk all over God's heaven.
you know I promised the Lord that I would
Hold out,
hold down,
hold out,
hold down.
hold out.
You know I promised the Lord that I would
Hold out
until he meets me,
till he meets me,
until he meets me,
till he meets me,
until he meets me,
till he meets me,
until my God meets me.
till he meets
I'm
me,
gonna keep on waiting
till he meets me,
until he meets me,
till he meets me,
until he meets me.
till he meets me.
You know I promised the Lord that I would
Hold out.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. And the broken-hearted people living in this world agree, there will be an answer, let it be. For though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. There will be an answer, let it be. Yeah, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. And when the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. Wake up to the sound of music. Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. 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 Whisper words of wisdom. Let it be. Let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be.
Tomorrow is a brand new day. All my sins have been washed away. My hands are new. My life is free. My heart is pure. I've been redeemed, oh yeah.
We ran the race,
We kept the fight.
we kept the fight.
We shed our blood.
cross,
through stormy weather,
through storm and rain,
because of Christ.
because of Christ.
Now we can say,
Now we can say
that we
are conquerors.
See, I know
Conquerors.
that we
are conquerors.
See, I know
Conquerors.
What an incredible, incredible number of songs. And what an incredible gathering. And this is not only a momentous time in Vanderbilt's history and life, but it's also a momentous occasion for the entire community. The young people to my right represent the young people of the greater Nashville community. They are participants in what has become an annual Martin Luther King essay and oratorical contest. These are young people from as far away as Columbia, Tennessee, Spring Hill, and the like. I'm going to read their names and their schools, and then they're going to come up and recite their poems and essays. Jacob Bell is from Wilson Central. Landria Berkeley is from Isaac Litton Middle School. Kayvon Green is from Pearl Cone High. Taylor Greer is from White House Middle. And last but not least, Gerald Wynn is from Spring Hill High School, and they will proceed in that order. Jacob.
I walk into the restaurant and sit on the white chair. White eyes are upon me as disapproval fills the open air. Discontent soon turns into shouting, and the waiter yells, "Get out." As my bravery turns to doubting, I realize I could really do without. As my surroundings become intense, I look up to my friends and remember what I'm fighting for, not blood or gore, but peace and nonviolence. The police arrived to drag me away, but bondage was in my past. Farther away they drag, I wonder, how long is this going to last? But stores begin to segregate, and I see a glimpse of hope. Time to rejoice and celebrate for times that we have had to cope. We are more than our color, we deserve better than this. We are humans that have earned our rights of freedom and bliss. I pray to God upon one knee that I leave more than a movement, but a lasting legacy. Thank you.
If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were alive today, his dream for our young people would go something like this. Today we are gathered here because I have a message that I want all of you young people to hear. This world's youth has changed so much over the years. It seems that the youth of today don't care about where they came from. They are so concerned about what the latest songs and trends are. Youth are so caught up in this world that they don't have time to hear about the struggles and pain us colored folks had to endure. Young people, my dream for you all is to be the best that you can be. Be not concerned about the way others view you. As long as God is pleased with your life, that is all you need to worry about. I want to see each and every one of you make something of your life because I know you all can. But you have to want it for yourself. You have to want to make good grades. You have to want to go to college. I am not making you do anything. I am just encouraging you to do what is right. Keep your heads up high and let the world see how determined you are. Don't let anyone steal your joy and happiness. Yes, people may talk about you because you make good grades or help the teacher whenever you are needed. Let them talk. They talked about Jesus, and people are going to talk about you until the day you die. But you should not allow that to bring you down. You should let it make you stronger. You love yourself even when you think others don't. You should also love your enemies because holding grudges is just going to make you feel more upset than you were before. Young people, chase after your dreams and don't let anyone tell you that you are not achievable. Look in the mirror and tell yourself, I am somebody, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I hope that all of you take what I have said and apply it to your everyday lives. May God keep you and bless you according to his will.
My poem is We All Have a Dream. We all have a dream that everyone will get along. Innocent people get killed that is never done wrong. Martin Luther King performed I Have a Dream. We can change America only if we work as a team. Guns, violence, drugs, and thugs can all be replaced by kisses and hugs. Robbers, thieves, bullets, and crooks can all be avoided by keeping our head in books. Jump in, jump out like there's no tomorrow. My mind is filled with joy, but my heart is filled with sorrow. I think about my ancestors as they're lying in the grave. You should forgive those whites, for they treated us like slaves. Get along with the people in our communities from hour to hour. Learn from them, and as a team, we shall be empowered. Jump for love, leap for joy. We should still be equal no matter boy or girl. Come on, guys, beginning with you and me. Let's all make Martin Luther King's dream come true. We're brothers and sisters in Jesus' name. We have to stay close if we want to continue this dirty game. Life is like chess. Every move you make can be replaced. And then you say the wrong thing, there's a bullet in your face. With guns, why do we always take a stand? Let's try something else, perhaps a Bible in your hand. Why can't whites and blacks come together as one? Victory is ours, and we shall overcome. My brothers and sisters should not harm each other in any way. Red, black, or blue, just throw the flags away. Life is like a movie. Let's go to the next scene. We can make it all come true, but this is my dream.
Martin Luther King, the man who had a dream. He was so bright, he stood up to fight for civil rights. Oppression caused oppression because of the whites' aggression. So we all agree today he would have a dream to say. Republicans and Democrats, oh please stop acting like foolish cats. You kick and scratch when you don't get your way, and then you'll so rudely say, it's your entire fault, but no one thought we could come together in peace. Young people of America, I have a dream to share. Of anybody and everybody, you'll be the one to care. We are a country indeed. If we continue to fight, we will not succeed. I'm here to tell you to learn from your mistakes because politicians aren't teaching you at all. They here are perfect examples of a cat in a fight, but both being trampled. So again I say, don't get caught up in this mess unless you wish to confess that you are one of them who fights and argues when your country can come together and stay that way forever and ever. America, America, what do I say? Remember my dream I told you today. Don't be one of those foolish cats who falls into a stream. If Martin Luther King were still alive today, that would be his dream, his powerful dream to say.
The legacy of a king. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., heaven sent to the nation, and came into this world to present a declaration. With charisma in his degrees, he sent out a famous decree, speaking to America about the ill effects of segregation. The well-known doctor announced his dream, one that was much too common, it seemed. Though in spite of it all, few heard heaven's call. It was time to embrace our future kings and queens. There are many haters and debaters throughout the town. The haters continue to constantly frown. But despite this very fact, Martin looked past that. He wasn't letting no one break him down. He continued to lead and pave the way, the road to freedom we call it today. He did so without violence, ignoring the concept of silence, and now his methods are here to stay. King's aim was to see segregation no more, but the undercover predators craved blood and gore. With the shot of a gun, swept from under the sun, up to heaven his spirit soared. Today as we go about our lives, we should take time to sit and think about the man who rightfully earned his wings and gained the legacy of a king. Thank you.
Thank you, young people. Thank you. We're going to have words from the Chancellor of Vanderbilt University, Nicholas Zeppos. We also need to move a podium here, so bear with us as that's done. Thank you.
I want to welcome everybody to our Martin Luther King Jr. commemorative address. We are here through this keynote address to commemorate Dr. King's life and his legacy. Vanderbilt has entered into a new chapter in its history by engaging in education not through our let's go to class on Martin Luther King Day, but to study, to reflect, to find other ways of engagement and reflection on this important day in our nation's history. This day in, not day off, is really the result of student leadership and student initiative and our provost, Richard McCarty. And I want to recognize the amazing leadership of our students on campus for pointing out how important this day is and the variety of ways we can commemorate and celebrate. And in this first year, in our new celebration, we have found a number of ways to reflect and to participate. This morning, I was privileged to participate in the annual citywide march from the Jefferson Street Church to the Gentry Center on the TSU campus. On our campus, we've had lunchtime roundtables and discussions and teach-ins. We had participation in the Nashville Freedom Ride. And of course, we also have this privilege of hosting Julian Bond for our keynote address. So I'm honored to be here today to welcome you to this keynote address, and I would now like to turn this podium over to Gabrielle Westbrook, who will offer a more formal introduction of our speaker, Julian Bond. Thank you.
Good evening. A student's remark. After Dr. King's assassination in April of 1968, Julian Bond and William F. Buckley appeared together at Vanderbilt as part of Vanderbilt's Impact series that was titled Dissent. I believe Bond and Buckley actually spoke at Vanderbilt approximately a week after King's assassination. They engaged in a spirited but civil debate about the significance of the life of Martin Luther King. During that highly emotional time of national distress, it was a real tribute to Vanderbilt that it could host such a high-level discussion by such prominent individuals. I remember telling graduates of other universities how pleased I was to attend such a university that could do such things at such a time as this. Doing so was a real tribute to the fact that Vanderbilt maintained itself as an open forum. Julian Bond may or may not remember his earlier appearance, but I will certainly never forget. Kevin Brady, Bachelor's of Arts, College of Arts and Science, 1969. From his college days as a founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to his present chairmanship of the NAACP, Julian Bond has been an active participant in the movements for civil rights, economic justice, and peace, and an aggressive spokesman for the disinherited. As an activist who has faced jail for his convictions, as a veteran of more than 20 years of service in the Georgia General Assembly, as a writer, a teacher, and a lecturer, Bond has been on the cutting edge of social change since he was a college student, leading the sit-in demonstrations in Atlanta in 1960. Tonight, after over 40 years from visiting Vanderbilt for the previous time, I would like you all to stand and welcome Julian Bond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, I remember that occasion when William F. Buckley and I spoke together, and I don't remember it well enough to remember which of us spoke first, but I do remember that each of us got a standing ovation. And I thought, how could that be? Because I know I contradicted everything he said, and I know he contradicted everything I said. And when I asked later for an explanation, somebody said, that's because Vanderbilt students are polite. It's a great pleasure to be back here after many, many visits to this campus and to Nashville. I was born in Nashville at Hubbard Hospital 71 years ago, day before yesterday. And it's a great pleasure to be back, but I know that's not the reason I was invited here. The reason I was invited here is because you know about my close, intimate, personal association with Dr. King. And if you don't know about it, I'm going to tell you about it right now. I know there are people in this audience who have heard somebody say, I was a student of Dr. King's. But Dr. King only taught one time, only taught one class, only 8 people in the class. I'm one of the 8. So if the person saying I was a student of Dr. King wasn't among that 8, he's lying. Now, I wish I could tell you that I have a deep memory of what occurred in that class, but unfortunately I don't. I didn't have the wit to take notes. I didn't have the wit to bring a tape recorder to class to preserve the pearls of wisdom that fell from the lips of this marvelous man. In fact, I remember nothing that transpired between teacher and student in the class, but I do remember one day, class was over. He and I were walking across the beautiful Morehouse College campus. I said to him, Doc, his friends called him Doc. I said, Doc, how are you doing? He said, Julian, I don't feel well. He said, unemployment is high, racism is everywhere, segregation is immovable. I feel awful, he said. I have a nightmare. I said, no, Doc, turn that around. Try, I have a dream. And I sense doubt. But just remember, my word is my bond. Now, for much of my adult life, I've been engaged in what was once called race work, fighting to make justice and fairness a reality for everyone. The racial picture in America has improved remarkably in my lifetime, so much so that a black man has been elected President of the United States, an unthinkable development just a few years ago. But paradoxically, his victory in 2008 has convinced many that all racial barriers and restrictions have been vanquished, and we have entered racial nirvana across the land. I'm here to dispel that notion, and in the process, discuss the challenges we face in the area of civil rights. Those who say that race is history have it exactly backward. History is race. The word America, after all, scrambled spells, I am race. And America is race, from its symbolism to its substance, from its founding by slaveholders to its rending by the Civil War, from Johnny Reb to Jim Crow, from the Ku Klux Klan to Katrina and to Gina. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the start of the Civil War, the war that claimed more American lives than all other wars combined in our nation's history. Across the South, celebrations are already underway. South Carolina, the first state to leave the Union, the last state to recognize the King holiday, has already held a secession band, compete with a band called Unreconstructed, playing Dixie. Georgia will reenact its 1861 secession convention, and Alabama will reprise the swearing-in of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. The day of the secession ball in Charleston, a marker about secession was dedicated. At the ceremony, Charleston Mayor Joe Riley told the crowd that South Carolina seceded in part to preserve slavery. Someone in the crowd shouted, "You're a liar." It may have been Congressman Joe Wilson. Now, no one had to tell the enslaved people of the South what the war was all about. When Charleston fell to the Union Army, thousands of former slaves, decked out in red, white, and blue, and displaying the national flag, paraded triumphantly through the city streets. At the end of the procession came a hearse. Written on it were the words, "Slavery is dead." The Civil War sesquicentennial is occurring, of course, during the presidency of the first black person to hold his country's highest office. Other ironies abound. When the Civil War ended, Southerners viewed the Republicans as an abolitionist party. Today they embrace it as the white people's party. Then opponents regarded Lincoln's election as intolerable. Today many feel that way about President Obama. Obama carried every state that Lincoln won, and in every state that was part of the Confederacy, John McCain won a larger share of the white vote than he did nationwide. His share of the white vote in the states that most vigorously opposed the Civil Rights Movement, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, ranged from a staggering 73 to 88%. Having declared war to preserve slavery, in the war's aftermath, the traitor states denied having done so. Like today's right-wingers, they claimed their disaffection was rooted in respect for states' rights. Virginia's Attorney General is even now promoting a constitutional amendment that would give states the right to override federal law. That's the same state whose state-approved textbooks erroneously claimed that thousands of blacks voluntarily fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Then, John C. Calhoun called slavery a positive good. Now, Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour tells us the racial situation in his state in the 1960s wasn't so bad, and the racist White Citizen Council was a force for good. Such is the complex rhythm of our nation's racial dance. Nothing forces us to confront the centrality of race to our past as much as the Civil War, and nothing forces us to acknowledge its continued centrality to our present more than the refusal by some after 150 years to admit that the war was about slavery. This whitewashing of history was on full display after the newly elected House of Representatives opened with a reading of the Constitution, omitting its condoning slavery. The Founding Fathers may have tried to form a more perfect union, but they weren't perfect, and neither was their founding document. The reading of the Constitution was interrupted when a screaming woman in the gallery questions Obama's citizenship. These birthers, whom we used to know as Birchers, have more in common with Confederates than they do with patriots. Both our response to the nation's first black president and the response to the Civil War's anniversary confirm that we are still a country at war with itself. But we are not the same country. We've gone from civil war to civil rights. The Civil War centennial in 1961 occurred against the background of a segregated South. 50 years later, the President of the United States is a man who would not have been allowed to stay in the hotel where the secession ball was held in. In 1961, the Civil Rights Movement was gaining momentum, as was Martin Luther King. Gunned down in Memphis only 7 years later, he has now been dead longer than he lived. It was only 13 years later, during the Montgomery bus boycott, that King had been introduced to the nation and the world. He was then only 26 years old. At that early stage of the boycott, he understood how historic it would be. 4 days after Rosa Parks stood up for justice by sitting down, the bus boycott began. That evening at the first mass meeting, King declared, "When the history books are written in the future, somebody will have to say, there lived a race of people, a black people, who had the moral courage to stand up for their rights, and thereby they injected a new meaning into the veins of history and civilization." King did not exaggerate. Montgomery was the beginning of a mass movement that destroyed segregation and permanently changed our world. In 1963 alone, the year that King, fresh from the battlefields of Birmingham, told the nation about his dream at the March on Washington, there were more than 10,000 anti-racist demonstrations. The result was the enactment of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the most sweeping civil rights legislation before or since, and our Congress' finest hour. We look back on the years between Montgomery and 1955 and the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 with some pride. Those were the days when politicians of both parties supported the struggle for civil rights. Now they struggle to be civil. Those were the days when banks loaned money to people, and not like today when the people loan money to the banks. Those were the days we were powered by our values and not valued for our power. Those were the days when good music was popular and when popular music was good. Those were the days when the president picked the Supreme Court and not the other way around. Those were the days when we had a war on poverty and not a war on the poor. Those were the days when the news media really was fair and balanced and not just mouthpieces for the misinformed. But those were not the good old days. In those days, the law, the courts, the schools, and almost every institution favored rights, whites. This was white supremacy. When the Supreme Court announced in May of 1955, in the second of two Brown decisions, that the white South could make hay slowly in dismantling segregated schools, I was 1 year older than Emmett Till. His death 3 months after the second Brown decision was much more immediate to me than the court's pronouncements had been. We were nearly the same age when he was murdered in Money, Mississippi, for whistling at a white woman. His death terrified me, but in the fall of 1957, a group of black teenagers encouraged me to put that fear aside. These young people, the 9 young women and men who integrated Little Rock Central High School, set a high standard of grace and courage under fire when they dared the mobs that surrounded their school. Here, I thought, this is what I can be, if only the chance comes my way. The chance to test and to prove myself did come my way in 1960, as it came to thousands of other black high school and college students across the South, in a mobilization of young black people not duplicated before or since. Let me repeat that again. A mobilization of young black people not duplicated before or since. Not duplicated before or since. First through the freedom rides, then in the sit-ins, then in voter registration and political organizing drives in the rural South, we joined an old movement against white supremacy that had deep, strong roots. Now, King was the most famous. He was the best known of all the modern movement's personalities, but we ought to remember this was a people's movement. It produced leaders of its own. It relied not on the noted, but on the nameless, not on the famous, but the faceless. It didn't wait for commands from afar to begin a campaign against injustice. It saw wrong and acted against it. It saw evil and it brought it down. Many of us now stand in reflection of that earlier movement's success, confused about what the next steps ought to be. The task ahead is enormous, equal to, if not greater than, the job already done. Today, we are 4 decades past the second Reconstruction, the modern movement for civil rights that eliminated segregation in the United States, and we are 14 decades past the first Reconstruction, the single period in American history in which the national government used armed might to enforce the civil rights of black Americans. 114 years ago, 15 years ago, black Americans faced prospects eerily similar to those we face today. Then it was 30 years after Civil War and the first Reconstruction. The 19th century was winding down, and white Americans were growing weary of worrying about the welfare of the newly freed slaves, tired of fighting to secure their right to vote, to attend a public school. Then, as now, a race-weary nation decided these problems could best be solved if left to the individual states. Then, as now, racist demagogues walked the land. Then, as now, minorities and immigrants became scapegoats for real and imagined economic distress. Then, a reign of state-sanctioned and private terror, including ritual human sacrifice, swept across the South to reinforce white supremacy. That's when the heavy hand of racial segregation descended across the region, a cotton curtain that separated blacks from education, from opportunity, but not from hope. As we recall the struggles of the recent past, many of us are confused about what the movement's aims and goals were, what it accomplished, where it failed, and what our responsibilities are to complete its unfinished business today. Looking back at that movement from today, we now see a very different view of the events and personalities of that period. Instead of the towering figures of Kings and Kennedys standing alone, we now see an army of anonymous women and men. Instead of famous orations made to multitudes, we now also see the planning and the work that preceded the triumphant speech. Instead of a series of well-publicized marches and protests, we now also see long organizing campaigns and brave and lonely soldiers often working in near solitude. And instead of prayerful petitions for government's deliverance, we now see aggressive demands and the ethic of self-reliance and self-help. We now realize our view of the movement's goals were narrow too. Seeking more than the removal of racial segregation, that movement did not want to be integrated into a burning house. Rather, it wanted to build a better house for everyone. It marched on Washington for freedom and jobs, not for abstract freedom alone. And instead of a sudden and unanticipated upsurge in black activism in Montgomery in 1955, we now see a long and unceasing history of aggressive challenges to white supremacy that began as long ago as slavery time. And instead of a movement that ended in 1968 with the death of Dr. King, we now see continued movement, stretching from the ancient past until this moment, with different forms and personalities, in many places, many locales, differing methods, differing techniques, whose central goal has always been the elimination of restrictions based on race. The founding of the NAACP in 1909 gave the movement an organized base. It soon developed an aggressive strategy of litigation aimed at striking down racial restrictions enshrined in law, triumphing in 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education, ending legal segregation in public schools. That decision effectively ended segregation's legality, but it also gave a nonviolent army the license to challenge segregation's morality as well. From Brown in 1954 forward, the movement expanded its targets, its techniques, and its tactics. Organizations and leadership expanded too. When Dr. King came on the scene as leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, he articulated a new weapon, nonviolent resistance of fighting segregation. That method required direct action through mass participation. Reliance on slower appeals to the courts began to subside. In this period, we won gains at lunch counters, movie theaters, bus stations, polling places. The fabric of legal segregation began to come undone. That movement then was truly a second Reconstruction, whose ripples were felt far beyond the southern states and whose victories benefited far more than blacks. Like the first Reconstruction, it saw gains for blacks extended to greater protections for others. Like the first Reconstruction, it gave new life to other movements of disadvantaged Americans. And like the first Reconstruction, the second one ended when the national purpose ended and reaction began to sweep the land. But before it slowed, it changed our country forever. A voteless people voted with their bodies and their feet and paved the way for other social protest. The anti-war movement of the 1960s drew its earliest soldiers from the Southern Freedom Army. The reborn movement for women's rights took many of its cues and much of its momentum from the Southern movement for civil rights. The movement's origins were in a bitter struggle for elemental civil rights, but it largely became, in the post-segregation era, a movement for political and economic power. And today, black women and men hold office and wield power in numbers we only dreamed of before. But despite impressive increases in the numbers of black people holding public office, despite our ability to sit, eat, ride, and vote and go to school in places that used to bar black faces, in some important ways, non-white Americans face problems more difficult to attack now than in all the years that went before. Much of the origins of today's distresses are found in the recent past and come to climax in the 1980s and the 1990s. In 1968, the Kerner Commission, appointed by President Johnson to investigate the causes and prescribe the cures for the riots of 1967, concluded that white racism was the single most important cause of continued inequality in income, housing, employment, education, and life chances between blacks and whites. But within a few short years, the growing number of blacks and other minorities pushing for entry into and power in the academy, the media, business, government, and other traditionally white male institutions created a backlash in the discourse over race. The previously privileged majority exploded in angry resentment at having to share space with the formerly excluded. The historic pattern of black advance and white insistence on retreat continued on. Opinion leaders began to reformulate and redefine the terms of the discussion. No longer was the Kerner Commission's description of the problem acceptable. Any indictment of white America could be abandoned, and a kind of Susan Smith defense was adopted. Black people did it to the country, did it to themselves. Black behavior, not white racism, became the reason why whites and blacks lived in separate worlds. Racism retreated, pathology advanced. The burden of racial problem solving shifted from racism's creators to its victims. The failure of the lesser breeds to enjoy society's fruit became their fault alone. In a kind of nonsensical tautology, we heard again and again, these people are poor because they are pathological because they are poor. This perversion of reality occurred as a result of an organized campaign which continues until this day. It is led by a curious mix of whites and a few blacks, academics, journalists, policymakers. Its aim is the demobilization of effective insurgent politics, the depoliticizing of discussions of our gross maldistribution of income, and the adoption of reactionary and punitive social policy. Over time, opposition to government, especially Washington government, succeeded opposition to communism as a secular religion. The United Nations, Washington bureaucrats, gays and lesbians, and supporters of minority rights replaced the Soviet Union as the evil empire, and together these became the energies driving the callous coalition that captured Congress in 1994, and to a large extent, the energies driving the teabaggers today. As long ago as 1964, Republicans had begun to remake their party as the white people's party, and they found a winning formula in the intersection of race and opposition to activist government. Conservative Southern Democrats became Republicans. Liberal Northern Republicans became Democrats. With November's election, the Republicanization of the white South became complete. There is now only one white Democratic candidate from the states of the Deep South. For much of the 1980s, America was presided over by an amiable ideologue whose sole intent was removing government from every aspect of our lives. One of the Reagan acolytes was named John Roberts. The memos he wrote while working in the Reagan White House contained racist and sexist jokes, but his approach to the law was no joke. He marshaled a crusader's zeal in his effort to roll back the civil rights gains of the 1960s and the 70s, everything from voting rights to women's rights. Today, of course, he's Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and he continues his crusade against what he's called this sordid business, this divvying up by race. The Roberts Court, in a cruel irony, observed the 50th anniversary of the Little Rock school crisis by gutting Brown v. Board, the historic case which gave birth to Little Rock and was supposed to end school segregation. Black and Hispanic school children today are more separate from white children than when Dr. King was killed, the result of a systematic neglect of civil rights policy for decades, including fair housing laws. School resegregation also means that the average Black or Latino student is in a school where 60% of the classmates are poor. I believe in an integrated America, integrated jobs, homes, and schools. I believe in enough to have spent most of my life in its elusive pursuit. I think it is a legal, moral, and political imperative for America, a matter of elemental justice, simple right waged against historic wrong. We are such a young nation, so recently removed from slavery, that only my father's generation stands between Julian Bond and human bondage. My grandfather, James Bond, was born a slave in 1863 in Kentucky. Freedom didn't come for him until the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865. He and his mother were property, like a horse or a chair. As a young girl, she'd been given away as a wedding present to a new bride. And when that bride became pregnant, her husband, that's my great-grandmother's owner and master, exercised his right to make his wife slave his mistress. That union produced 2 children, one of them my grandfather. At age 15, barely able to read or write, he hitched his tuition, a steer, to a rope and walked 100 miles across Kentucky to Berea College, and the college let him in. He belonged to a transcendent generation of Black Americans, a generation born into slavery, freed by the Civil War, determined to make their way as free women and men. Dr. King belonged to another transcendent generation, a generation also born in segregation, freed from racism's restraints by their own efforts, equally determined to make their way as free women and men. When my grandfather graduated from Berea in 1892, the college asked him to deliver the commencement address. He said then, "The pessimist from his corner looks out on the world of wickedness and sin, and blinded by all that is good or hopeful in the condition and the progress of the human race, bewails the present state of affairs and predicts woeful things for the future. In every cloud he beholds a destructive storm, in every flash of lightning an omen of evil, and in every shadow that falls across his path a lurking foe. But he forgets that the clouds also bring life and hope, that lightning purifies the atmosphere, that shadow and darkness prepare for sunshine and growth, and that hardships and adversity nerve the race as the individual for greater efforts and grander victories. While we struggle toward greater efforts and grander victories, we're still being tested by hardships and adversity. The rich have been sitting at the banquet table, the rest of us have been on the menu. So the gap has grown between the haves, the have-mores, and the have-nots. Between 1996 and 2006, CEO pay rose by 45%, while worker pay rose a mere 7%. The top 300,000 Americans collectively now have as much income as the bottom 50,000 million Americans. The top 20% of earners take over half of the national income, while the bottom 20% get just 3.4%. Plutarch warned us, an imbalance between rich and poor is the oldest and most fatal ailment of all republics. Black Americans, of course, are more likely to be poor than rich, and they are worse off than their white counterparts. Almost every social indicator, from birth to death, reflects black-white disparities. Infant mortality rates are 146% higher for blacks. Chances of imprisonment are 440% higher. Rates of death from homicide 521% higher. Lack of health insurance 42% more likely. The proportion with a college degree 60% lower. And the average white American will live 5.5 years longer than the average black American. The fragility of middle-class life for black Americans is illustrated by their downward mobility. Nearly half of all blacks born into the middle class 40 years ago have descended into poverty or near poverty as adults, compared to only 16% of whites. White unemployment is high enough at 9.4%, but black unemployment is even higher at 15.7%. Home ownership rates for blacks, already low, have been sinking under the weight of the subprime mortgage crisis, which stands likely to be the largest loss of African American wealth we have ever seen, wiping out a generation of home wealth building. Blacks were 3 times more likely to have subprime loans than whites, with such loans accounting for 55% of loans to blacks and only 17% of loans to whites. This didn't happen by accident. There's evidence that minority neighborhoods were actually targeted, that lenders have gone after people whom they think are less sophisticated borrowers. Just as President Obama's victory did not herald a post-civil rights America or mean that race had been vanquished, it could not and did not end structural inequality or racist attitudes. Indeed, there's evidence that it fomented them. President Obama is to the Tea Party as the moon is to werewolves. Within 1 month of President Obama's inauguration, Rick Santelli, a CNBC anchor, christened the Tea Party during a February 19, 2000 rant about poor black homeowners having homes and mortgages they could not afford. It's time for another Tea Party, Santelli bellowed. What we're doing in this country will make Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin roll over on their graves. You know, I teach at the University of Virginia, and Jefferson is a presence there. And Thomas Jefferson wrote approvingly in 1811 about taxing only the wealthy, which meant, he said, the farmer will see his government supported, his children educated, and the face of his country made a paradise by the contributions of the rich class, without his being called upon to spend a cent from his earnings. One of the Tea Party's heroines says, Obama is the most un-American president we have ever had. What is it that differentiates Obama from every other American president? From its inception, the Tea Party has been both ahistoric and racist. Glenn Beck accused President Obama of harboring a deep-seated hatred of white people. Rush Limbaugh routinely refers to the health care bill as reparations, invoking slavery's angry descendants to imply incorrectly that most of the law's beneficiaries are non-white. In reality, the Tea Partiers are puppets, and their puppet masters are a consortium of corporate chieftains and financiers. The clear aim of the right wing is to repeal the progressive achievements of our lifetime: the new health care bill, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, the right to join labor unions, unemployment insurance, the Department of Education, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The notion that the Constitution does not authorize many things that the federal government does now was incorporated into the Republicans' Pledge to America, more accurately, a plague on America, which requires Congress to show the constitutional basis for any new laws. Now that requirement, for the first time in history, has been incorporated into the rules of the Republican-controlled House. The 2010 midterm election, our third change election in a row, was in many ways politics as usual. 90% of blacks, 65% of Hispanics, and almost half of all women voted Democratic. The major difference between this go-round and 2008 was the age of the electorate. Almost twice as many 18 to 29-year-olds voted in 2008 compared to 2010. And in 2008, 16% of all voters were over 65, compared to 25% last November. The two age groups were exact opposite in voting preferences. 6 of 10 young voters chose the Democrats, and 6 of 10 of the seniors favored the Republicans. But even among this whiter, older, more male, more conservative electorate, the mandate for change was murky. 48% wanted to repeal health care, for example, while 47% wanted to leave it as is or expand it. The election may have been loud, but it was not clear. What is clear is our politics have been poisoned by armed and paranoid self-described patriots drawn from the Taliban wing of American politics. As the sheriff of Pima County, Arizona, said after the shooting of Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, the vitriol of our discourse ought to prompt us to do a little soul searching as a country. The real issue for many opponents today is we now have a president whom they believe is guilty of governing while black. He was not on the ballot last November, but believe me, they had him within their sights. The tea baggers are 99% white. 52% of them, twice as many as the rest of the population, believe too much attention has been paid to black people. 62% of them, more than twice the percentage of white Democrats, think discrimination against whites is as big a problem as discrimination against racial minorities. They see the nation's demographics turning them into a minority, and they don't like it. They say they want their country back, and we ask, what was that country like? In their country, I couldn't eat at a lunch counter, I couldn't cast a vote. I couldn't attend the University of Virginia, let alone teach there. These weren't the good old days for me. If Obama represents the end of the American I knew, I say good for him. The Tea Partiers rail against deficits that were largely created by Bush and Reagan tax cuts for the rich. They're furious about taxes, when with the exception of a brief period 2 decades ago, tax rates are lower than at any time since World War II, and they purport to see constitutional violations about which they had no concern just a few years ago. You tell me what has changed to make them so angry. And if you tell me that the Tea Bag Party, the Palin Party, has nothing to do with race, I'll tell you you've been drinking something and it isn't tea. The Civil War that freed my grandfather was fought over whether blacks and whites shared a common humanity. Less than 10 years after it ended, the nation chose sides with the losers and agreed to continue black repression for almost 100 years. The freed slaves found their former masters once again control their fate. American slavery was a human horror of staggering dimensions, a true crime against humanity. The prophets had produced endowed great fortunes and enriched generations, and its dreadful legacy embraces us all today. 246 years of slavery were followed by 100 years of state-sanctioned discrimination, reinforced by public and private terror, ending only after a major struggle in 1965, 2 years after Barack Obama was born. If you are 45 years old or older, it is only in your lifetime that racial equality before the law became a reality, not before. For only 45 years have all black Americans been granted the full rights of citizens. Only 45 years since legal segregation was ended nationwide. Only 45 years since the right to register and vote was universally guaranteed. Only 45 years since the protections of the law and Constitution were officially extended to everyone. We're now asked to believe that 200 years of being somebody else's property, followed by 100 years of legal oppression in the South and discrimination in the North, can be wiped out by 4.5 decades of half-hearted remediation and 1 presidential election. We're now asked to believe that no permanent damage was done to the oppressors or the oppressed. We're asked to believe that we Americans are now a healed and whole people. The truth is that Jim Crow may be dead, but racism is alive and well. That's the central fact of life for every non-white American. It eclipses income, position, education. Race trumps them all. So we have major work to do. None of it's easy. We've never wished our way to freedom. Instead, we've always worked our way. Today, we have much more to work with, and take heart that so much has changed in America. The changes that have come have everything to do with the work of the modern movement for the civil rights and the work the NAACP has waged for 100 years. It was fitting that Obama gave his acceptance speech as his party's nominee exactly 45 years to the day after King's I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington. For his inaugural, he rode into Washington on a private railroad car built in the 1930s, when being a Pullman porter was the best job a black man could hope to have and the worst job on the train. He was sworn in front of the National Mall, which had been the site of a slave market. He took the oath standing on the steps of the Capitol built by slaves who cut the timber, baked the bricks, laid the stone for its foundation. He then moved into the White House, also built by slaves, and it's fitting he was sworn in almost 100 years after the founding of the NAACP. Just as he launched his candidacy in the shadow of Abraham Lincoln on the steps of the Illinois State Capitol in Springfield, so the NAACP issued a call to the nation on the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth in 1909. That call asked then, as we ask now, for all believers in democracy to join in the renewal of the struggle for civil and political liberty. If we do not, then the teabaggers will win. There needs to be a constantly growing and always reviving movement across America if we're to maintain and expand victories such as reforming health care. We can't forget that Dr. King stood before and with thousands, the people who made this mighty movement what it was. From Jamestown slave pens to Montgomery's boycotted buses, these ordinary women and men labored in obscurity. And from Montgomery forward, they provided the foot soldiers of the Freedom Army. They shared with King and abiding faith in America. They walked in dignity rather than ride in shame. They faced bombs in Birmingham and mobs in Mississippi. They sat down at lunch counters so others could stand up. They marched and they organized. King didn't march from Selma to Montgomery by himself. He didn't speak to an empty field at the March on Washington. There were thousands marching with him and thousands before him and thousands more who did the dirty work that preceded the triumphant march. The successful strategies of the modern movement were litigation, organization, mobilization, and coalition, all aimed at creating a national constituency for civil rights. Sometimes it is the simplest of deeds, sitting at a lunch counter, going to a new school, applying for a marriage license, casting a vote. These can challenge the way we think and the way we act. We have a long and honorable tradition of social justice in this country. It still sends forth the message that when we act together, we can overcome. By the year 2050, blacks and Hispanics together will be 40% of the nation's population. The growth in immigration, the emergence of new and vibrant populations of people of color hold out great promise for us and great peril. The promise is that the coalition for justice will grow larger and stronger as new allies join the fight. The peril comes from real fears that our common foes will find ways to separate and divide us. It doesn't make sense if blacks and Latinos fight over which of us has the least amount of power. Together we can constitute a mighty force for right. Racial justice, economic equality, world peace, these were the themes that occupied Dr. King's life. They ought to occupy ours today. When I first started working more than 5 decades ago, there were 5 workers paying in the National Retirement System for every retiree. Of course, there's no way I could possibly know who my 5 were, but it's a good chance their names were Carl, Ralph, Bob, Steve, and Bill. When I retire, there are going to be 3 workers paying in the retirement system, and there's a good chance their names will be Tamika, Maria, and Jose. And I'm here to tell you tonight that you better make sure that Tamika, Maria, and Jose have the best schools, the best health care, the best jobs, and the strongest protections against discrimination they possibly can. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you a great deal. And if I'm not mistaken, thank you a great deal for that kind applause. We're going to have the question and answer period. And my wife told me not to say this, but she's not here. Before the question period begins, you don't mind if I set some limits as to which kinds of questions will be tolerated and which kinds won't. This is not an attempt to dodge any hard questions because I'm like your teachers. I believe I can answer any question on any subject at any time. But there's some questions that just won't do. And these are questions asked by people who don't want to ask a question, but who want to make a speech. Only one speech scheduled for the auditorium tonight. And it's over. And you can tell these people because they always begin by saying, isn't it true that? Doesn't everybody know that? Isn't it a well-known fact that? Don't the best authorities agree that? Well, if it's true, if everybody knows it, if it's a well-known fact, the best authorities agree, why bring it up here? Now, I understand there are microphones. Are there? Or are they not? There, here, and here. And anyone who wants to ask a question, please come to a microphone and we'll be glad to accommodate you, here or here.
All right. Thank you so much for your holistic presentation. I was with you in '95 when you spoke, was a teacher at Harvard University for 25 scholars. There the problem was, how do we bring 21st century types of people born after that civil rights movement to not have so much apathy and to be a part of what you already mentioned this evening? One question, how do we go about doing that and continue that process? The second question, pulls out of Dr. Gordon Allport interlocution, words that might be spoken about that you mentioned this evening with, say, Pat O'Reilly, Palin, many others that might ignite certain types of attitudes and beliefs, as it did during the movement with the Klan and the Citizens Council to do bombings and other things. How relevant is that for us to be very kind of sensitive to it? Thank you.
Well, these are two daunting questions, and let me see if I can try to put them together. It's difficult to understand why anyone today, or when Dr. King was alive, or in the period before even Dr. King was built, would have been apathetic about the conditions of people of color and poor people in the United States. It's almost impossible to imagine that anyone could close a blind eye to this, or could choose not to take some action against it. But obviously in all of these periods, many people did, as many people do today. As unbelievably, as we all know is true, here in Nashville, there are many people who are not registered to vote, and many who are registered to vote but who don't vote. But there they are. What do you do? It just means that the rest of us, the intelligent people, have to do more to encourage our fellow citizens to engage in these kinds of activities, these ordinary civic activities, registering to vote, being a part of some community group. These ordinary activities have to encourage them, and encourage them over and over again in the kindest, most polite way, to make sure they do the right thing all of the time, and it will pay off to us. We will receive rewards in the future. These won't be rewards in the great by and by. They'll be rewards right here at home, on the ground, where our governments will become better, our civic responsibilities will expand, everything that we hope for will begin to appear, and we'll find ourselves living in a better place. So that's my best answer to both these questions. Probably not a total answer, but let me go to another microphone.
Thank you again for coming to talk to us. Toward the end of your speech, you were talking about minorities and how sometimes African Americans and other minorities like Hispanics seem to fight over who has less power than the other. As a minority of both African American and Hispanic descent, where do we start tearing down the walls that are being made within minorities themselves? Because it seems like if you look at the media, they're helping these problems start, but also it seems to be ingrained in the African American or the Hispanic tradition that for some reason we can't work together.
Well, you know, African Americans, let me speak only about African Americans rather than Hispanics. African Americans have many prejudices that they've accumulated over the years. If you look at tolerance for homosexuality, African Americans are at the bottom in tolerance for homosexuality. And I imagine this is some religious-based prejudice that we have absorbed because we've absorbed, so much, both good and bad, from the Holy Bible. And we're not able always to make a discrimination between what is good and what is bad. But because of that, on scales of people who believe in fairness and justice for everyone, we come up last when gays and lesbians are concerned. Even though we ourselves have a fair complement of gays and lesbians among us, we persist in the idea that this is a choice of behavior. We persist in the idea that people are gay or lesbian because they want to be, not because they were born the way their Savior made them. Because to believe the other is to believe that the Savior made a big mistake. And I hope these Christians don't believe that. But if they do, no better for them. So again, I'm not sure if that's a good answer to your question either, but I think we've got to find some way to fight against all these kinds of prejudices, racial, ethnic, religious, and so on, and constantly be on the alert for people who say them. You always kind of get upset if somebody around you uses a racial or religious slur, even if it doesn't affect you or your religion or your ethnicity. Somebody uses a slur, and sometimes you say to yourself, gee, should I have said something, or maybe I should just let that alone? No, you should say something. You should do something about it, because if you don't speak out, it'll be done again and again and again. So we just got to be on the alert to be aware of these things. And over here?
Hi, it's great to see you again. By that I mean I saw you for the first time about 40-some years ago in Minneapolis. I believe it was at the Northrop Auditorium, University of Minnesota. I don't know if you remember being there.
I remember that. You had on a blue dress.
There you go. Neither of us had gray hair back then. But you touched on, I think you invoked the names of Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh, and I'm wondering who gave these people a forum to begin with, and I'm wondering also, and maybe you'll disagree with the premise, but maybe to put this in the form of a question, why has, to use a sweeping generalization, Black America allowed white America to pick its leaders?
Well, I don't think Black America does allow white America to pick its leaders, but white America has tried time and time again to pick the leadership of African Americans. I don't know if you remember when Richard Nixon was president, I can't even remember the man's name, they tried to promote some federal cabinet officer, a black guy, to be, and they taped conversations in the Nixon White House of how they could promote this black guy to replace Martin Luther King. Now, of course, it's, you know, stupidity on its face that you can say to black people, listen, we have this other guy. He can't make speeches. He doesn't believe in anything you believe in. He, you know, just doesn't, he's not an exciting person. But we want you to follow him instead of this guy, Martin Luther King. I mean, just ignorant on its face, but they seriously consider that, and they've tried to do that many other times. I think the real problem among many that people of color have is that, again, we don't always, you know, I heard the beginning of this program from backstage, they were talking about the wish both of Mrs. King before she passed away and her family today, and of the Obama administration now, and I hope successive administrations, that this day ought to be a day on, not a day off. And that this day ought to be spent doing things that you think Dr. King would do were he here, or would want to do in his absence. Not just this day, but all the days of the year. And I think slowly this day, which for many people is just a day off, a day away from the work, away from the job, is becoming a day on, a day in which to do something. And to the degree that we can do that, then some of these problems and some of these difficulties we face will begin to diminish. They won't disappear, but they'll begin to diminish. To the degree that we put our shoulders to the wheel, our collective shoulders to the wheel, then these problems will begin to diminish. But we have to do that. We can't just sit around and say, gee, these are terrible things happening. I need something to be done. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much for coming to Vanderbilt. We as professors and students and staff really appreciate your presence. You touched on the fact that you're a professor at University of Virginia. And my question deals with, and I'm sure you've given it a lot of thought, how can we get more minorities into the professorate? What do you think are some of the things that we as minorities can do, and what do you think are some of the things that a university like UVA or Vanderbilt can do? Thank you.
Well, the University of Virginia has the best record of graduating black students than any four-year public college in the United States. Any four-year public college in the United States. So I'm talking about all of the black public, historically black institutions, all of the state schools all over the country. The University of Virginia has the best record of graduating black students of any college, any public college in the United States. And it does it, of course, by both being fairly selective, and secondly, by monitoring the students' progress through class. I used to be an advisor of students at the University of Virginia, and I knew that if one of my advisees sort of slipped and he or she didn't do as well as they should have done, then I had someone to notify, or I was notified by someone that Mary or Joe wasn't doing as well as Mary or Joe ought to be doing in their physics or geography or whatever class it was, and that something needed to be done. And I would be the first line of defense, and perhaps somebody else could do it better than I, or should be alerted to, but they monitored students, and so the attrition rate was not as high as it might have been. So those two factors together made it amass this record. And then I think they're so proud of the record, they're afraid to let it slip, and because they like to boast about it, and they want to continue to be able to do so. So that's one answer to the question of how you get college graduates, because you want to get in the professorate, you have to be a college graduate. The second thing is that I think we have to work harder at this level after college to make sure the professor class is as welcoming as it should be. Now, I'm at the University of Virginia's history department. I'm the only person in my department without a graduate degree. I have 25 degrees I've been given. Of course, that doesn't count for much. You have to earn your degree. My father was a college president, and he had to give away a lot of degrees, and he sort of, I shouldn't say this because Vanderbilt might want to give me a degree someday, but he didn't like the idea of giving away degrees to wealthy people or whomever it was, because he had got his own degree from the University of Chicago at hard work and thought it was everybody else should get theirs the same way. So he ingrained in me this attitude that while these things are nice to have, I'm not complaining, I'm not giving them back either. They're not the same as earned degrees. We've got to make the path to the earned degree a little more welcoming for black students than it is, and I'm not sure if it is welcoming everywhere. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not welcoming everywhere. So we've got to make it more welcoming, because this is, it's a wonderful thing for those young people here who are wondering about what their career ought to be. To be a university professor is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's a great life. You can't imagine. I've taught at UVA and American University for 20 plus years. I taught twice at Harvard. I taught at Williams College. I've taught at Drexel. I taught at the University of Pennsylvania. Wonderful, wonderful students in almost all of these schools. Just a great time. It's a great life. I invite you to try it out. You'll be so happy you did, and you'll feel so good about it.
Good evening, sir. It's a real honor to be able to sit here and listen to your speech this evening. My name's Dwayne Arbogast, and I'm a custodian at Vanderbilt University, have been for 18 years, and for that same length of time, I've also been the union steward for custodial staff, of whom the majority are African American. And right now, we are in the middle of contract negotiations with the Vanderbilt University for better working conditions and wages. And I would appreciate thank you. The struggle goes on. But I want to ask, sir, for your insights and your tips and on how to proceed, anything you think might be helpful, and also to be able to know we could continue on your continued support for the workers of Vanderbilt during this time.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm a member of organized labor for most of my adult life, and it's just been great for me. I'm a member of the American Federation of Television and Variety Artists. That's the people on TV. And used to be a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and have been in these two unions, which have now merged, not merged, but have joint representation for much of my adult life. And the benefits I've received from them are just fantastic. I'm enjoying a pension from AFTRA right now, so I couldn't quit work tomorrow, but because I'm not going to do it. But anyway, the benefits are enormous, and the main benefit is the protection I've had from arbitrary dismissal. Nobody could arbitrarily fire me in any of the jobs I've had because I've been a member of these unions. If I'm stupid, they could fire me. If I'm crooked, they could fire me. But they can't fire me arbitrarily because I have the protection of this union. And that's what unions do for you. So any of you, and unions are under terrible attack all over the United States today. Every state is losing money. And what's the first thing they do? Get rid of the public workers. Get rid of the people who dig the ditches, who sweep the sidewalks, the policemen, the firemen, the people who run into the burning building instead of running away from it. Get rid of those people first. That's the first thing that comes to their mind. These people, these public servants, are so important to you. Just look what happened in Arizona. Shot down the congresswoman, and I'm not blaming anybody for that except this mindless kid, and her aide, who were government servants, These are people doing the government's job. And they're doing the government's job because somebody chose them in a democratic way to do it. And it ought to be an inspiration to more of us to go into this kind of work, because there's no greater work than service. And that's not, anyway, so good luck with the drive. Just got to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, and draw in support from like-minded, friendly, decent, honest, upright, wonderful people who should be joining with you and should stand with you and help you and support you. So good luck to you.
Thank you.
This question is invoked from recent completion of Brother Andrew Young's recollection of the Civil Rights Movement and his description of the SELC and the SNCC working together as a big brother and a little brother, or a father's son type tandem, in that duality. Do you think that it is necessary in 2011 to possibly create or have that duality as an entity of, say, the NAACP? And could you speak on how you would go about doing that with the involvement of younger people, as in the SNCC, versus, you know, an older, more conservative crowd, at that time at least, of the SELC, with the same goal in kind of two different pathways?
Well, I know Reverend Young, and respect and admire him and think him a wonderful, wonderful person, but I wouldn't describe our relationship that way. I didn't think that we were younger brothers to the elder statesmen of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I thought we were a separate organization doing similar work in a different way. And they did it their way and we did it ours. And I'm not sure, we need somebody to do that kind of work today, but I'm a little suspicious of people who say, let's start a new organization. We have a plethora of organizations in African American communities. There's nothing wrong with the existing organizations, and I'm particularly fond of the NAACP. I was chairman of the board for 11 years. I was serving the board for 4 years before that. I was president of the Atlanta branch, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful organization. And the best thing about the NAACP is that it is democratic. That's a small d. It's democratic. If anybody here wants to join and you got $30, you're an adult, you have $30, you can join. Anybody who shares our values is more than welcome. There's no race test, there's no income test, no political test at all. You just have to have $30 and share our values. We'd like to have you. We'd love to have you. Come on in. The Nashville NAACP would love to have you. And the Nashville NAACP, like every other NAACP branch in the country, has elections every 2 years. I don't know the people at the Nashville NAACP. I met them a couple of years ago. I'm sure they're wonderful people. Let me take another example. In Chicken Switch, Georgia, okay? Chicken Switch, Georgia, we don't know anything about the NAACP, but suppose the NAACP is not doing what you wanted to do in Chicken Switch, Georgia. All you got to do is take your $30 down there and sign up, and when they have an election, run for office, and if you don't like the president of the Chicken Switch branch, then throw the president out. So because of the democratic nature of the NAACP, it is open to anyone who wants to join and who shares our values and who wants to do the work. If you want to do the work, we want you to come. If you don't want to do the work, don't come, please. But if you want to do the work and you share our values, we want you and we need you. So I would suggest people of any age who want to be involved in civil rights, the easiest thing to do is to join an organization with an ongoing program that's doing something right now. And in most cities in the United States, that's the NAACP, so that would be my suggestion. I think we have one more over here, and I think, okay, one over here and one over here. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'd like to start off by saying my name is Tierra Mahoney, and I'm a graduating senior of this wonderful university. And also that my grandfather was Louis Valdez Jr., and he always spoke highly of you. My question is, what do you say to those who have reached a level that is higher than the generations before them? So maybe the first to graduate with a college degree, or the first to even reach college, or even the first to graduate from high school, as a lot of the parents of the people in my generation aren't CEOs of companies or aren't high officials in government and things like that. What do you say to them, because they're just happy that they made it a step further than the people before them?
I say congratulations first, and that whoever you are and however old you are, it's not too late to think about going up another rung higher. No reason you can't take another step forward. You know, community college, if you graduate from high school, for example, the community colleges all over the United States, and many of them are wonderful institutions that are inexpensive. You can go at night, you can go on weekends, you can get a college degree. It may take a little longer than it would if you went someplace else, but it surely won't cost as much money. Or you can go there for 2 years and do so well that Vanderbilt will offer you a scholarship, and you'll come here and finish your degree. But somehow or another, I'd say to the person, congratulations for going as far as you have, but don't let that be the last step. Okay? Okay.
Thanks. Once again, I'd just like to echo all the thanks for coming and speaking with us tonight. My question pertains to, I know you talked a lot in your speech about the fact that there's still a lot of gaps present, be it in the workplace, be it in education, and I'm curious as to what you think the best way going forward is to continue to bridge these gaps. And along with that, do you feel that programs like affirmative action are the best way to do this by offering opportunities to people who might not otherwise have them? Or is it a possible hindrance by drawing attention to not the content of one's character, but the color of one's skin, not their talents?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer very quickly. But affirmative action is one of the ways in which we need to move forward, but it's not the only way, and ought not be thought as the only path to progress. And, you know, I don't think affirmative action draws attention to racial problems. They don't need attention drawn to them. They seem to be fairly evident, at least to many people. They're fairly evident already, and no one has to say, ooh, look over there. You can pretty much tell what's going on. And there's nothing wrong with affirmative action. It's been upheld by the courts, or in various forms it's been upheld by the courts, and it's proven successful remedy. But it ought not be thought of as the only thing we can do. There are a multiplicity of things we could do and should do and ought to be doing, and ought not settle on just one thing. But we ought to be open and available for everything and try everything, because you can't afford just to try one thing. Okay? All right, thank you all very much.
I will be very short. Okay, thank everyone for coming out. We just have 2 announcements. The first one is, please note that the event planned for Library Lawn has been moved to Surratt Cinema. That's the film of Vanderbilt and the Civil Rights Movement. Because of the weather, it's been moved to Surratt Cinema. And also note that Mr. Bond will be signing his books out in the reception area. They are for sale. And last but not least, Martin Luther King Jr. said, a man that doesn't stand for something will fall for anything. And today I am so happy that not only I stood, but today marks the 1-year anniversary of Vanderbilt standing for something with regards to the MLK Day. So I thank you all for coming out, and have a great night. All right, hold steady, hold steady. In the tradition of the Civil Rights Movement, we would like to close by singing We Shall Overcome, and we have this lovely choir to come with us, and we want you all to join hands and sing with us.